I read your responses to the tucking the tailbone post that I made, and I think I'm beginning to understand the problem. First off, there are a few teachers who are saying to stop tucking the tailbone or don't tuck the tailbone. I've been speaking about this for about 15 years. I've recently wrote an email that I've published a couple of times on the anatomy of tucking the tailbone and why it's misapplied. And those people who have trained with me, whether online training or in a live training, they understand the next steps, right? Because they've learned the next steps of what to do instead of tucking the tailbone. For those of you who haven't done training with me, I can completely understand why you're left with, well, what do I do? If I'm not tucking the tailbone, then what do I do? Let's first start with the question of what do I do? And I want to suggest to you that that's not quite the accurate question. It's not so much about what to do. It's more about what's the intention for the cueing. Why are you saying what you're saying? And is it landing in the way that you want it to land? So in other words, is the cue that's coming out of your mouth when you're teaching, whether in a group setting or in a private setting, is it enabling your students to progress the way you want them to progress? So I'll give you a bit of a caveat. Where I'm coming from is I am all about students progressing. I want to see that their asana is progressing, that they're not staying stuck in the way that they've always done their asana. To me, it's all about growth. It's all about expansion. It's all about progression. The other is that a lot of the people I teach have pain, so I want to see them getting out of pain. Right? So those are sort of the two sides of the spectrum. I want to be able to see someone progressing in their movement, getting more functional, being able to do more complex movements, as well as seeing them reducing and getting out of pain. So let's take a look at some of the reasons why tucking the tailbone is used or is thought to be good. The first one is that people believe that tucking the tailbone will create core stability. And I think the primary reason for that is because when someone tucks their tailbone, they feel like their lower abdomen is contracting. And well, it is. When you tuck the tailbone, the tailbone goes down, the pubic bone comes up, and the rectus abdominis, the superficial abdominal muscle, is contracting. So you will feel muscular strength there. The thing is that the rectus abdominis has nothing to do with core stability. So there's a perception of stability, but it's not developing core stability. It's just not. The second is that people will tuck the tailbone because it's safe. They think that it creates some sort of containment, which might be akin to the core conversation in tucking the tailbone. And the thing is that tucking the tailbone isn't safe either. There's nothing about tucking the tailbone that enables safety. If you're in standing, you take your feet wide. Now, or let's actually start in Tadasana. Tuck your tailbone and then try and bring your feet wide versus being in Tadasana with your pelvis where it is starting, and then take your feet wide. And notice what that feels. And then do the same thing and go into Warrior 1 and do the same thing and go into Warrior 2 and not only notice the limitation in your movement pattern, but notice where tension is being held in your body. And notice if you have to start to deeply breathe in order to breathe into the movement or into the pose, depending on where you are at in the sequence. The third is that people believe that if you tuck the tailbone, particularly in things like back bends, that you're going to prevent overextending of the spine. Well, that's not true either, because when you go into a back bend, you're extending your spine. So if you're tucking your tailbone, you have to untuck it anyway when you're going into extension into a back bend. So it's that one I actually have trouble with. You've probably seen in my face, that in my facial structures, I actually don't understand that one. I understand that it's taught. I just don't understand that one because you're moving your spine into flexion, right? So you're moving your spine into flexion, but you have to go into extension anyway to go into a back bend. So you're undoing that which you did. So it's actually not preventing overextending in a back bend. So then what to do? Okay, so I've said it again to you guys, right? It's like I say don't tuck the tailbone. I've given you reasons why, and you're still left with, well, now what? Well, let me give you some things to chew on. This is a short video. I can't give you everything in a short video. And really the fundamental experience of understanding what I'm going to say really comes in an online training or in a live training. So I encourage you that if this at all resonates with you, to look at that, because it will really, dare I say this, revolutionize the way you teach. And I feel able to say that because I've seen it. People will say to me, well, Susie, you've got a kinesiology background. You just know this stuff. And I can say to you that pretty much every single teacher that I've trained, apart from some physios and some OTs and some registered massage therapists and some physicians and some chiropractors and a few other health professionals, by and large, the most people that I've trained do not have any anatomy background. And they're getting kick-ass results in their practice. And what I mean by results is that they are enabling people to progress and to gain function, to improve and do more complex movements with ease, with smoothness and coordination, and they're also helping people reduce and get out of pain. To me, that's what it's all about, right? They're developing ease, they're gaining function, they're more able and applicable in the world, and they're reducing their pain. So, where to take this related to tucking the tailbone? Well, in the Anatomy and Asana book, I talk about some principles of movement. So my focus is all about movement and how movement creates asana. Asana is a state of being. Pose is an end form. Asana, when translated very loosely, I understand, is sitting comfortably and still. Pose is a form. You can get into a pose with tension. You can get into a pose with breath holding. You can get into a pose with a ton of consternation and compensation. Asana is sitting comfortably and still. Asana comes in a space that is without tension or inappropriate tension. Asana comes about inside of sukha or ease. Asana comes about when you're moving purely, when you're moving in a range of motion that's appropriate for you. Asana comes in when there's suppleness, not rigidness. Asana comes in when there's aliveness and lifeness, not spiritlessness. It's not around when there's collapse. It's there when there's strength, but not tension, not rigidity. So the key here is, are you moving the body the way it's designed to move? When you're going into movement, are you moving the leg bone and the hip socket the way it's meant to move? So if you take a look at Stan here, are we moving the leg bone in the range that it's meant to move, the way that this sucker has been designed? Or, this is the classic one I love to use, is when you take ankle to knee, right? Are you doing the movement leg bone in your hip socket, or are you doing pelvis on torso and opposite leg? So look closely, I'm not moving this hip. I'm losing my balance quite a bit, but I'm not moving this hip. So I might think that I'm getting into something getting close towards eagle, but in fact I haven't hardly moved my hip at all. I've done all this compensation somewhere else. So what I'm focusing on is focusing on pure movement, the way that the bones are meant to move in the joints, so that if the ribs pop up, I'm not holding them down. Okay, now what the heck does any of this have to do with tucking the tailbone, you're wondering? Well, if I move my legs wide, right, I'm stepping into warrior two or triangle, and I move my legs wide, and now I start to move myself towards triangle or warrior two. So I've just internally rotated one leg and externally rotated the other one. If my legs were too wide, if I was moved far beyond my range of motion, and in some styles of yoga, there's a certain placement of the legs and you step them wide. And then you start to rotate. If I went too far in my wide stance and then I tried to rotate, I might have taking my tailbone back. And then an untrained teacher or an untrained eye would say, oh, look, the tailbone, you've ducktailed, you better tuck. But it's not about the tuck, it's about you having just moved too far into the movement. That's why your tailbone went where it went to. So if you just made the movement more pure so that you could do the next part of the movement, if you just made it smaller, you'd be fine. Your tailbone won't be going back. If you go into little bridge or bridge pose and you just lift through your hips, you don't actually need to tuck your tailbone, because bridge pose is all about moving through your hips. So I want you to consider, I want you to look at the actual movement that's required to go into this end form called a pose. And how are you doing that movement? And then what's the intention then behind the cueing? Is the cueing about bringing forth the correct pose, or is it about bringing forth this state of being called asana and improving the function of the movement toward that pose? Because if we're just focusing on the pose, we're likely not focusing on function. When we focus on function, the pose just happens quite naturally. Chew on that for a while. If you have any comments, please post them here. And if you're interested, if this is starting to get your juices going, your curiosity going, then consider some of the online training that I offer, the live training that I offer. You'll get way more in depth with what I'm sharing here, because it truly is about moving purely, enabling your spine to be where it needs to be, enabling your pelvis to be in the space it needs to be relative to your spine, and just moving your joints around that space. And if you move well, if you move with ease, the poses will emerge and you won't have to contort yourself via tucking the tailbone or the sister, which is lengthening the tailbone. You won't have to do that. So consider that, chew on that, share any comments below. Have a great time on your mat.